Welcome to Sputnik, still orbiting the world with me, George Galloway, even in the time of the coronavirus, perhaps especially in the time of the coronavirus, interviewing the people and asking the questions that need to be asked and, above all, answered. Now, China has begun to hit back at the wave of attacks upon it as the originator of the Chinese virus, the Wuhan virus, as the power that allowed, at best, this terrible, wrecking virus to leak out and cause such havoc in the world. The first target of China's retaliation, as I myself predicted on this very show, was Australia, where 80% tariffs have been imposed on Australian goods and services coming into China, which will, of course, reduce Chinese exports to China practically to zero. Unkind critics have said that Australia is the gum on China's shoe, in which case the choice of China as the first target of the pushback by China is more easily understood. But there may be others as the United States government ramps up hostility and propaganda with China. Individual states in the United States of America start lawsuits against the Chinese government. And a bill is introduced into the US Senate to delist Chinese firms from the US Stock Exchange. And President Trump and Secretary Mike Pompeo, of course, daily turn up the volume of their own highly politicized criticisms. Well, to find out why China feels so aggrieved at what it calls the scapegoating of the People's Republic of China, we turn to an Italian-American who's lived in China for the last 20 years. He's a pianist, an author, and a businessman, and frankly, there's nothing that he doesn't know about China, in which he now lives. His name is Mario Cavolo, and we are very glad indeed to welcome him on board the Sputnik. Mario, welcome on board. Summarize for us why the Chinese are so angry, and do they have a right to be angry? Is there no substance in the allegations being made against your adopted country?
I live in Shenyang. Shenyang is in the Northeast, and in fact, the Northeast just now has had another new, fresh outbreak. Now, every country is going to be dealing with this in the course of the next year or so. We've gotten the virus under control. China's 2 months ahead of everybody else. China, all the Asian countries did a fabulous job of getting the virus under control quickly because they have disciplined civic duty, working with the governments, and governments did a great job. People did a great job. We got it under control. So once you get it under control, though, you start opening the economy back up. What happens? It's going to start popping back up. One guy, George, traveled from Jilin to Shenyang and came back home. 3 days later, he got a fever. They find out he's got the virus. The tracing and the testing, the tracing is the tracing of everyone. It's remarkable. 5 days later, his colleague got the fever and the virus from him. And then, I don't remember exactly, it ended up being 3 people. So, 3 new cases. That's all. Does that sound like a big deal? I mean, you're all experiencing thousands of new cases every day, right? So you're really concerned. Do you know what the Chinese government did? Do you know what we did? Cooperatively, respectfully, nicely, not like maniacs, okay? My wife received an announcement from the school telling her, and an Excel file, 566 people, their names, where they live, their addresses, traced to contact with those 3 guys. 165 of them are in 14-day quarantine, and then the others who were in touch with them are in watchful home quarantine. Why? To save lives. There's not been any press conferences. There's not been any politics. There's not been any economic talk. There's only, here in China, the place where supposedly everyone's a draconian, evil, CCP, bootlicking, crazy communist monster. It's exactly the opposite. Just caring about making sure no one else gets the virus. No talk of politics, no talk of economics. So saving lives, just being nice people and in a cooperative way. This is what's really happening here in China. And anyone who knows anything about China, who's ever lived here, knows this is the case. And then all this other propaganda is 100% nonsense. So if you were falsely accused of something like this, you'd be pretty upset about it too. So yeah, they have reason to be aggrieved.
Well, one of the brilliant articles that you wrote that went viral around the world was comparing and contrasting the 2009 H1N1 American swine flu, which was absolutely devastating in its effect, but which caused the United States no scapegoating at all. No one called it the American virus. No one ran away from Americans or tried to make punitive economic sanctions against America for that. Expand, if you will, on that point.
As of last week, Senate testimony by U.S. CDC Director Robert Redfield. Okay, thank you, Director Redfield, for stating exactly the opposite in Senate testimony of what Pompeo and Trump and Lord help us all, Tucker Carlson and Laura Ingraham and Senator Tom Cotton. I mean, they're all lunatics and they're spewing lies. And in Senate testimony, the director of the United States CDC, and Steve Bannon and Gordon Chang, good God, comes along and says, the Chinese health officials and the WHO announced formally on December 31st that this was happening in China. Never mind that U.S. intelligence already knew about it and didn't tell anyone except Israel. Forget that part, right? That was December 31st. And then he said, and on January 2nd, my U.S. CDC officials and colleagues were on the phone just 2 days after that official announcement, regularly collaborating and researching as scientists, as official health officials concerned with the counterparts in China and WHO. And in fact, the next day, January 3rd, I myself was on the phone with them. What was covered up? There was nothing covered up. Fast forward 3 weeks, January 23rd. Did the Chinese health officials hope that they could get this thing under control? Because there was, at the end of December, there was about 40 cases, okay? That's not a lot of cases. Keep in mind, it's an unknown virus, completely unknown. They don't know what they're dealing with, so they need time to figure it out. So they're dealing with it. The US CDC is working with them. WHO is working with them. By January 20th, Zhong Nanshan, the famous Chinese virologist, went to Wuhan personally and said, what's going on here? And they said, we're in trouble. We thought we could get this thing under control. We thought we knew what was happening, and it's going to be worse. It's going to be bad. 3 days later, the country of China locked down, as you know, the city of Wuhan, 11 million people, and the province of Hubei, 60 million. How many people are in UK total? Can you imagine such a drastic step? If it wasn't such a big deal and it wasn't a problem and the whole world was watching, would they have locked it down like that? I mean, they shut it down. So you're in UK, George, you're watching. You say, whoa, they just shut down the city of London. Obviously, it's serious. And what did they do? Nothing for weeks and weeks and weeks. That's the truth. That's the story. 5 days later or so, or 10 days later, I wrote that article. Because I was like, what's going on? Why is everybody criticizing China? I couldn't understand it. I said, something's not right here, folks.
Now, it may be on the principle that the Democrats hate the Russians and the Republicans hate the Chinese, that this is merely pre-election maneuvering.
There is no question this is specific political election campaign strategy and propaganda. The right wing went crazy on March 15th. Everything was fine through January, February. On March 15th, in the span of 48 hours, this is exactly identified by David Frum in his article in The Atlantic, he was like, what's going on? Literally, on the turn of a dime, the right-wing major media, in sync with Pompeo and Cotton and Donald Trump themselves, all summarily and together like a parade, declared China the liar, the killer of babies, and the enemy. It's politics. It's horrifying. Here in China, there's no politics, no elections. My wife and my mother-in-law, they're Chinese local people. They'll tell you, the Chinese government's concerned about one thing, making sure nobody gets the virus. Nothing else is a priority. Does that sound like a bad government to you? Not to me. Chinese people love their government and are in civic duty and sacrifice together with the government because they're doing the right thing. They're doing a great job. This is the last thing in the world the American government wants any of us to know, because look what happened to this country, to that country in the last 20 years. It was ruined. I'm heartbroken as an American. And I know half the country agrees with me and has seen this happening. My father, God bless him, he's rolling in his grave. That's the country that my family immigrated to. It's ruined. It's gone. And it's continuing. I got to stop right there.
Well, it's very powerful testimony, especially coming from you. But let's review where we are. The United States now has strategic bombers in the South China Sea. It has warships in the South China Sea. The Senate is proposing delisting Chinese businesses from the U.S. Stock Exchange. The prospects of Part 2 trade deal now look absolutely fanciful. Instead, there might be confiscatory measures, debt reneging, and so on. We're in a bad place right now in U.S.-China relations. Can we recover from it?
No, we're not going to recover from this. And you look at some of the economic analysis of what China's capability is in the supply chain, and I mean up the supply chain as well, not just cheap goods anymore. No other country in the world has even come close to the scale and the breadth of what China's capable of. End of discussion. And the American government can only blame its corporate leaders and government leaders for selling their souls for billions in profit to Wall Street and to themselves. They screwed the workers. They screwed the manufacturers. They handed the keys to the kingdom to China. George, if you were going to let me buy your Rolls Royce from you for only $20,000, I would be a fool to not take the great deal. And that's what they did. China took the good deal and ran with the ball. And now look what America did. They destroyed themselves, and now they're trying to blame China.
Mario Cavolo, stay safe, you and your Chinese family. Thanks for joining us on the Sputnik.
Thank you, George.
I don't know about you, but I'm buzzing about the International Day of the Bee. Tune in for the second half of the show and find out why. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Sputnik. Now, this week, some of us were buzzing about the fact that it was World Bee Day on the 20th of this month, in fact. Now, most people could have seen it coming and probably didn't. But the reality is bees are enormously important to all of us. And to no one more than my old friend Chris Turner, the Bolshevik beekeeper. I've been amongst his bees. He got stung when he was showing me around his bees. He's just been stung again, but he joins me here on the platform of the Sputnik. Chris Turner, thanks very much for joining us. Let's start with that apparently banal point. How come you keep getting stung when you're an ace beekeeper?
There is always a risk that you will get stung. It's an inevitability of the hobby. You can take a number of mitigating steps to kind of de-risk that. Usually in my scenario, it's because I've been sloppy around the hive. So in the case of the sting I got last week, I had my full bee suit on, had my nice dry gloves on, but didn't realise as I've been manipulating the hives that my glove had actually pulled away from my cuff, and it just left a very small flash of skin there for the bees to access. And inevitably, when that happens, the guard bees, which are the ones that usually come and find you, they'll find that piece of flesh and they'll sting you.
For an animal with presumably not much brain power, individually, collectively, they have a supreme intelligence, don't they?
Absolutely right. And this is one of the amazing things. You know, bees on their own, generally, certainly honeybees, they would soon perish on their own. As a colony, they have a method of organising. A lot of that is down to the way they interact in terms of the caste that they have, the caste system that they have with the queen, the worker bees and the drones. And a lot of the behaviour of the colony is actually guided by pheromones. So there are some pheromones, maybe clutching 4 or 5, which are absolutely key to the way bees behave and how they act. And in the case of me being stung, for instance, there is a bee pheromone, which is a sting pheromone, and that has the effect of effectively attracting other bees to the sting area. But there are other pheromones in the colony, and these all work in kind of unison. And they basically are responsible for high behaviour and for the general well-being of the colony.
Tell us about the Queen, because for those that are not royalists, it's a bit of a paradox. The Queen is key. The Queen is absolutely the centre of their world.
That Queen's sole responsibility is to lay eggs. But one fascinating thing, George, about the Queen is the moment she becomes of no use to the hive, give you an example, she stops laying with the kind of prolific way in which she needs to lay, they will actually get rid of her. They will raise a new queen. And it's the colony that actually control the raising of that queen. So the colony in the end, ultimately, are the controllers of the success of the colony. It's not the queen, although she does have an absolutely vital part to play in the ecosystem.
So they actually practice regicide. They collectively decide this queen isn't cutting it anymore. And what do? Kill her?
Yes, yeah. There's various things that can happen in the hive. They'll sometimes follow a procedure called supersedure, where they'll allow the queen to remain, but they'll actually retain and have a second queen come into the hive. They'll actually, by the way they feed the larvae, they'll actually raise a new queen themselves. And at that point, once that queen is active and mated, they'll then dispose of the existing queen.
How do you become a queen? Are you born a queen, or is someone chosen to be nourished as a queen? Fundamentally,
the queen decides, or is made to decide, whether or not she lays a fertilised or an unfertilised egg. Now, the unfertilised eggs are raised as drones, so they're the males, and they're a direct clone of the queen genetically. The fertilised eggs will develop into worker bees, and it's in the early stages of the development of the larvae that the workers in the hive will change the feed that they give the larvae, that provide to the larvae. And you'll have heard something called royal jelly. So royal jelly is effectively the feed of the to the larva that actually results in the queen actually being created. So it's actually the workers, the female workers themselves, who actually make that decision.
The worker bees are all female, is that correct? And the drones are all male?
That's right, yes. And it won't be lost on many of your viewers as to the scenario that we have with the males and the females, because basically the females do everything in the hive. There's a kind of a system of chores that they will go through. Initially, they'll clean the hive, they'll clean the cells, they'll then start to kind of organise in the colony. They'll look after and feed the queen. And as they go through their lifespan, they eventually start to then guard the hive, and then finally start to go out and forage for pollen and nectar. And that's the kind of second stage of their life, really. So pretty much all the activities that happen in a bee colony, in a honeybee colony, are actually undertaken by the females. The drones, the males, Their sole purpose is to reproduce with the Queen. And they pretty much have the life of Riley through the summer months, but they meet their death in two circumstances. One is that they're booted out of the hive at the end of the summer by the female workers, and they will die. And the other way that they will die is during reproduction with the Queen. And without going into too much detail, they're basically, if they do mate with the Queen, their sexual organ pretty much detaches from their body, and they drop to the ground dead.
Family viewing this show, I wish I could pursue the various metaphors that emerge from that story. And once they've stung you, they're dead?
So the sting of the worker bee is barbed, and it's attached to a sting sac or a venom sac. And if they do sting you, what generally happens is the barb of the sting will adhere to your skin. And as they pull away, it actually has the effect of pulling the sting or the venom sac and all of the muscles around the venom sac that actually inject the venom into your skin. It has the effect of detaching that from the body of the worker. And along with that, generally comes some of the body. And typically what will happen once you've been stung by that worker bee is she will fall to the ground and she will die also.
So she's on a suicide mission to attack you?
She absolutely is. Absolutely. And as I mentioned at the top of the programme there, if you think of the circumstances where I've been stung, and that sting pheromone lingers as a chemical trail around your body. So I've been in circumstances where hours later after being stung, I actually still get attacked by the bees who are following that chemical trail.
Wow. Now, how long does all this take? What's the lifespan of a bee?
Let's take, first of all, the Queen. The Queen will typically live potentially for up to 4 to 5 years. She's usually at a prime round about 2 years, but she couldn't easily live till 4 or 5 years' time. The drones tend to live for very few months in the summer, up to like 3 months, that kind of period. The workers are completely different. So in the summer, the worker bees, and with all of those chores that I talk about, the period of time that they're going to be alive is in a matter of weeks. They only last about 6 weeks before they die of exhaustion. What happens around about September, October in the colony is the workers start to feed the larvae a slightly different food. And it's essentially a higher fatty content in that food. And therefore what happens in the winter is the worker bees can live for up to 6 months. And that's a massive difference to your summer worker bees. So you talk about 6 weeks for a worker bee in the summer versus 6 months in the winter. And at the end of the winter, around about now, maybe just a bit before this time of year in springtime, what you'll find outside the hive is you'll see quite a few dead worker bees. And these are usually the winter bees that have actually died off, making way for the new summer bees to arrive.
Why was World Bee Day important?
As a planet, we rely heavily on pollinators generally for both our, certainly the flowers that we see in the meadows. Well, there's not many meadows left these days, but for sure, in terms of the food that we eat, a good third of the world produce, if not more, is actually reliant on pollinators. So essentially, their success is our success. We need to look after these individual animals and creatures, create environments and climates and circumstances where they can thrive and they can succeed. Because if that's not the case, we slowly in a decline, and that's one of the kind of areas. And I think there's a number of things that are responsible for that. The habitat destruction, without going into too much politics, agrochemicals, all those kind of things. These are all threats certainly to the bee community. So it's really vital that people kind of roll the sleeves up and take an active interest and where they can, try and do something for the environment.
I'm not sure about rolling our sleeves up, Chris, after what happened to you. But thanks for joining me on the Sputnik.
You're more than welcome, George. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, alas, that means it's the end of the show. But you can stay in touch with Sputnik through our social media portals on Twitter and on Facebook. But the most important thing, if you did enjoy the show, is that you come back next week at the same time in the same place to orbit the world with me, George Galloway. As for me, it's been marvelous.